Hey everyone, welcome to a special episode focusing on career opportunities and career growth for early career data scientists. I have a basic theory that in order to be good at data science, you should practice it. And the best way to practice it is for someone to pay you to do it on a daily basis. So with that in mind, we are specifically today going to be focusing on career strategies, growth ideas in environmental sciences. So we're sticking with the environmental sciences today. My contribution is that I'm wearing the greenest of my podcasting shirts. And everyone else, they are not wearing green shirts and therefore will have to contribute actual ideas and things like that. So welcome to the show, everyone. Grant, Megan, Elizabeth, welcome back. Or Elizabeth, welcome back. And Megan, Grant, welcome. To begin, maybe you should guys just introduce yourselves and what you do on a daily basis. Starting with Megan.
Okay. Thanks, Glenn. So I currently own and operate my own statistical consulting business. I do a lot of work in environmental and ecological problems in consulting, but I'm open to other things. In the past, I have worked in academia, so I've been a tenured professor of statistics. I have worked for an environmental consulting company. I have done more of my own consulting. I've worked with people in federal agencies across disciplines as a director of statistical consulting in academia. So I have a lot of experience across varied disciplines, but mostly in environmental science. I'm excited to be here. I love talking about kind of career paths, since I have obviously taken a few forks or put a few forks in my path. So I appreciate those conversations, and really I'm mostly interested in doing science well and decision making. And so that relates to obviously to the climate change and environmental questions.
Cool. And next person, Elizabeth, who, while she unmutes, I will thank for gathering our other two guests. I forgot to say that earlier. So I popped Elizabeth an email saying, hey, we had these environmental questions. Can you help me out? And she kindly brought on two further guests to help flesh out the range of experience. So with that, Elizabeth.
Yeah, hi, thanks, Glenn. I'm Elizabeth Mannshardt, and I work at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. And as Megan mentioned, there's been a lot of turns in the path and forks in the road in my statistician/data scientist career. So for a long time, I worked in academic statistics. I did a couple of postdocs. I'm still an adjunct associate professor at North Carolina State University. So I have various opportunities to work with students in that capacity. And then I started about 6 years ago as a statistician at the EPA in our Office of Air, basically. And did a lot of different assessments on air quality on various fronts. And about a year and a half ago, I took an opportunity in our DC headquarters in what I call more the IT side of data science. So I took a temporary position, and then now I have a permanent position in that office in the Information Access and Analytics Services Division. And so that is in the Office of Information Management, and basically does exactly that, manages all the flows and distribution and dissemination of data that comes in and out of the EPA. And my division specifically manages a cloud-hosted platform that sits kind of on top of all of our data, hosts some of our data, and also provides an analytics platform to kind of be doing that crunching in the cloud on the analytics side of things. And so for me as a statistician, while my job title is no longer statistician, it's kind of really exciting to be learning about that whole other side of data science, as my career has kind of pathed and forked, as Megan said. And so it just, I think part of that points to the opportunities that statistics can and data science can open up, just lots of different ways to have a career and lots of different fun path that you can go down.
Yeah, cool. I'll just second that very quickly, where I know that a lot of us in the statistics and data science and machine learning and AI fields, we tend to really focus on, like, if you aren't doing data analysis directly on a day-to-day basis, if you aren't building models, like, what are you doing with your time? And the fact is, there is a huge other side to these issues. One of the main reasons that we bring up ideas like AI systems, data engineers, machine learning engineers, is because there are major IT issues to handle. And honestly, if you just want to focus on the data analysis side, you're going to be heavily dependent on an IT infrastructure to make sure that what you're doing actually gets anywhere in the world and that it's not just a proof of concept research project. So I really appreciate Elizabeth, one, having the bravery to take that step and bring her statistical expertise to this IT side. And I've made a note for myself. We should bring her back on the show for her to tell us what we found. But before then, Grant, you're up next.
Sure. Thanks, Glenn. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you and have this discussion. So I am a vice president for research at United Health Group Research and Development, sometimes also known as Optum Labs. They're actually one and the same entity with two different names, but it is the research and development arm of United Health Group, which is a very large healthcare company, largest healthcare company in the US. And it includes both United Healthcare, which is an typical like healthcare insurance company, and Optum, which is healthcare services and IT services. And our role within that big ecosystem in an R&D group is actually to be thinking about not what is important and needed for the company right now, this quarter, to make financials and budgets and things like that, but actually to be focused on where is the world going and what are the needs that the healthcare system will have in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years out, and beyond. And using where the science is going in all the different areas that are relevant to healthcare, and also new technologies that are being developed, and thinking about how do we actually craft those and leverage them in a way that delivers better health for people. Better health in our case actually means trying to identify disease earlier, get in front of it, even do preventative care, so that ideally we can have fewer people who are progressing to really severe chronic disease, which is very costly to the healthcare system as a whole. Within that, I manage a large team of both data scientists and engineers, to your point earlier about supporting capabilities for data scientists. And we build new prototypes of products for healthcare. And so within that, there's the whole range of kind of early stage research and clinical trials that we do, all the way into prototyping and developing new mobile technology products that are aimed at improving health. Now, you're probably wondering at this point, isn't this an environmental sciences podcast? And it turns out my background actually is in environmental sciences. So I did a PhD in statistics at Colorado State, and studied extreme value analysis, and applied that to climate change modeling. So one of the things we were interested in is, do climate simulation models accurately reproduce extreme weather events? It turns out in some cases they do, in some cases they don't. I went on to be a visiting faculty at Carnegie Mellon after I finished my PhD, before ending up in the role that I am now. So I'm happy to talk about kind of career transitions and journeys for early career people.
Actually, on that note, since you did EVT stuff, maybe we should just take this and go off in a completely different direction, just talk about Fisher Tippett for the entire time. Would that be agreeable to everyone? Megan, you're up. But yeah, so a great group. Elizabeth, thanks so much for bringing this group together. So what we have here is we have a few questions provided by some people who are interested in mainly entering the field of environmental data science. And so the first question was, what was your advice on people switching careers into environmental data science? And so from my quick editorializing, I would say that I would view this from sort of three different angles. One, there are people who might be already in statistics or data science, and they're making the transition into the environmental side. So say someone like me, where I just said, I'm tired of a medical machine learning, time for me to, get out in the woods. How would someone who already has that sort of analytical skill set transition into environmental data science? The second sort of person we might think of is someone who's in the environmental subject domain. And once that, now it's essentially entered the data science side. So I don't know, maybe Ranger Rick is ready to bone up on his coding and his data analysis skills and get into that area. And then obviously there's the not category. So say that you are looking for a complete career change, you're interested in data science, you like environmental topics. And so who that might, how that person might make a transition, because I fear that these three sort of different paradigms or whatever might be, they might try different things. So how should we begin? Maybe the already data scientist or statistician who's looking to get into environmental science, what would you suggest they do? Maybe Megan to begin, since you've hopped around quite a bit. Well, all you have, but Megan first.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the kind of a theme that would go across all of those questions is I think that the value of previous experience, even if you don't feel like it's directly applicable to the problems that you're going to be working on, is incredibly important. I don't care what your previous experience is, there's something that you can bring in a different perspective to the new problems. And I mean, I think from when I was kind of when I've led teams of statisticians, let's say, or data scientists, like in private industry, or even for a group of graduate students in consulting, the thing that was really important to me is to gather a group of people with different backgrounds that bring different previous experience to that environmental or whatever realm. So that's my very kind of general thing. I think it's easy to think, oh, I don't have the coding skills, or I haven't fit these models before, and just to really worry about those details. And that part will come with the learning on the job. But it's really just thinking about problems in a little different way. If you have data collection experience in a different realm, if you have social science experience, even just committee and volunteer work, like all of that is really important to kind of holistically viewing problems, and then I believe doing a better job attempting to solve them anyway. It also brings a perspective of not I guess kind of the easy thing to kind of juxtaposition is thinking about somebody coming from a completely different discipline into data science versus coming from a math and computer science background into data science. And both of those have huge value, but I think we tend to maybe put a little more emphasis, or the people coming from other disciplines tend to think, oh, well, the right way to get there is through math and computer science. And that is definitely not, in my opinion, we need both. And there's huge value in these other paths to get there. So as far as, sorry, I kind of went to the general answer instead of sticking to the moving from another data science position to environmental. I think that for that piece, my advice would be, really talking to people in the field, but not having a closed view on what type of problems work on. So there are social science problems in environmental science. There are if you want to get into the coding and math piece and the modeling and that piece, there's policy. There's just so many different aspects that you really it's hard to answer that question specifically without kind of giving the sense that it is really broad.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because I noticed that in the questions themselves, some of them were actually very fixated on, for example, like, I want to study specifically climate science. And while that's cool, I was also thinking, it's like, well, but what about everything else in environmental science that you might actually find very meaningful and useful in some way? And while, of course, no one lives external to the climate, at the same time, that there might be a variety of other problems that, given that you do have to focus on an individual problem, like you might care more about, red squirrels than in a problem that revolves around that, or tracking foliage growth in some place that might be, I guess, revegetating or something like that. So it seemed to me that while a lot of people seem to be fixating on sort of the climate issue, that there's a lot else out there that you might enjoy and find equally as meaningful. So on that, Elizabeth or Grant, who would like to go next on the issue of, so you're a statistician, but you're looking to switch specifically to environmental data science? Elizabeth?
Yeah, I would echo pretty much everything that Megan said, and specifically echo the point about bringing the diverse backgrounds is really important. I already know how I would approach a problem and how I would solve a problem, so I learn an incredible amount and get incredible perspectives and insights into problems when you do bring in a diverse array of backgrounds on board to tackle the problem. So there's definitely that's definitely the case. So it should not be a deterrent if someone doesn't have a formal training in statistics or machine learning, et cetera. And then speaking not for the EPA, but of the EPA, there are so many different types of jobs at different institutions and organizations that people don't even realize exist. So it really would behoove someone to just poke around the website as much as possible and just sort of see the types of things that are there. So when I came on board at EPA, I just thought I'm going to be a statistician at EPA. I'm going to meet a couple other nerdy statisticians. We're going to go about our work. But there's so many layers. There's environmental engineers, there's environmental justice, there's people like Megan said that are working on policy. That's definitely something that's become a much greater interest to me. So there's lawyers that work in the environmental realm. There's writers, you need people to do the communication. So there's really all aspects, and however you can, find your niche, find a way into the organization, then you can often do like on the job learning with regards to the specific coding skills or programming skills or software applications that you might need to be using on the job. So there's just a lot of different paths, and I really encourage people to think about that. Megan also touched on volunteer work that you can do. So I've done a lot of work with the ASA across different chapters and sections, and the board work that I have done as a volunteer has really served me to develop skills beyond that of the traditional statistics methodology that one would put in place if you're doing head down doing research back in your office. But really developing power skills, basically, communication and, how do you learn how to brand your work that you're doing and how to communicate that work. And I have used those experiences that I have gained through ASA and other professional organizations in order to get to the next step in my own career. So in my interview for the management position that I currently have, I gave examples based on managing boards for ASA. So you kind of, it's like a building block, and some sit next to each other and others sit on top, and then eventually you've built yourself this career out of different projects and jobs and relationships that you've built along the way. So there's a lot of ways into an environmental career. And since I have been at EPA, I've done virtually nothing on climate, but so much on the environmental side. So there's just so many other paths in environmental statistics and data science that go beyond just thinking about climate change, which is a hugely important issue, not to understate that, but just saying that there's a lot of different avenues that someone can take when looking at public health and environmental issues.
Yeah, just to double down on that, because one of the things that I see when I hear, obviously, people contact me asking, how can I go into the biomedical or biofarm space? And when they think about biofarm, they really only think about the pharmaceutical industry, and what they don't consider is that, biotech is another big thing. Life sciences is another big thing, in that, well, yes, these are all connected in some way, that essentially they're really limiting the options of what the possibilities are because they're fixated on one component. Now, Grant, say one of the many people who you supervise comes to you and says, they've been a biomedical engineer and I've had it with this, I'm headed into the environmental sciences. What would you tell them? Like, they're a good statistician. What would you say? Okay, you want to do this, this, and this, study this thing real quick so that you can get up to speed. What would you suggest that they do?
Well, I think this applies to any switch in industries for data scientists. But for me, the first piece of advice would be to, go out and learn about the problem space of either a particular job that looks interesting to you or a particular field. You'll most likely find that a lot of the methods and techniques or ways of solving some of those challenges and problems are actually similar across different domain areas or industries. For example, like spatial modeling of air pollution is actually a technique that's really applicable to a lot of social determinants of health type of work that we do to try to understand connections to disease. So I think for for going out and not just expressing interest in a another industry, but also trying to land a job. I think if you go out and learn about the problem space that is out there, what people are currently working on in that area, what companies are currently focused on that are in that industry, and you can actually demonstrate that in a job interview and talk to an employer and say, yeah, I see that you guys are doing X. I'm really interested in this, and I think my background in Y could really be applicable to that. From the perspective of an employer who's interviewing someone, that's a really really valuable thing to have somebody who is expressing genuine interest in something to the point that they've gone out and done some independent exploration and study on it, and can speak to it to some level. So that would be my biggest piece of advice.
Yeah, I'll just double down on that. That you'd be amazed how much a candidate can really shoot themselves in the foot if they don't actually demonstrate, like do the most basic amount of homework on the job for which they're applying. And I've always taken that for granted. Although, like, admittedly, I haven't looked for a job in several years, but the fact is, like, I always took that for granted that you would go out and do that. But it turns out you can actually end up being the most well-prepared candidate simply because you actually looked at the company website, looked at the job description, like, they say they do A, and this job description has something to do with A in analyzing data in that. And it's like, you'll stand out. Somehow that's a way to stand out, and that doesn't make any sense. The nice thing about if you're trying to make the transition in environmental sciences, it's a general interest topic. It's not like you really need to work yourself up to get interested in that topic. There's so many interesting areas. So yeah, definitely do your homework. I guess to keep the pressure on Grant, we'll go back the other clockwise, clockwise direction, I guess. So now we have the environmental scientist, someone who has that on the ground experience that many data scientists are going to be very enviable of. How would you suggest that they start getting the quantitative skills to make that jump?
Well, I think that getting the quantitative skills. I mean, if it's somebody who already has quantitative skills and has just been applying them in, say, environmental sciences, and they say, I'm just not interested in this anymore. The problem doesn't excite me. Coming to work every day. I would come back to them and say, okay, well, so let's think about, where could these types of methods actually be applicable in other, in my space, the space that you're expressing interest in, whether that's, healthcare delivery or life sciences or other related areas. So I think, it kind of is the same, it's kind of the same answer as before is, I think people sometimes, especially in the data science and statistics world, people sometimes we sometimes put ourselves in a box and say, well, gosh, my dissertation was on extreme value theory, and I'm not comfortable. I'm not sure if I can really work on stuff outside of that, or know how to be productive in another area. And what you often end up finding, as I think Megan kind of alluded to this, is when you get out into, whether that be a different research area with a research group or inside a company, an industry, you find pretty quickly that you actually have a very unique set of skills just by understanding basic concepts around data science, mathematics, and statistics. And even as you're working with people who are experts in other fields, whether that be, in my case, physicians or people with PhDs in life sciences, you quickly start to understand that they actually need your contributions and your input from. Sometimes it's really simple, basic statistical analysis types of things, but very often it's actually you can apply some of the methodology and some of the creative thinking that you maybe were applying in a different area in life sciences to solve a new problem, or to at least bring a new perspective on a problem in a different domain. And I'm not sure if environmental science may have some unique ways in which that can happen and be applied to other fields, but I think that's generally true across all different domains for someone with technical backgrounds.
Yeah, cool. Those are all very good points, especially when the idea is that when we are working these technical domains, we are effectively dealing with abstractions of the phenomena that we are modeling and handling. So to the extent that we're already in the mode of abstracting from what we're dealing with, those abstractions can start coming closer together. And I would quickly point out when you talk about like extreme value theorem, it's like extreme value theorem. It'll really get you into a box as long as you accept that it's applicable in astrophysics, healthcare, machine monitoring, patient monitoring, environmental science, like all those things. And security, things like that. So it really, you're either going to win one way, you're winning either way. Either the field already uses the techniques that you use, in which case you can integrate easily, or alternatively, they don't, in which case you have a new value proposition because you have expertise on a technical aspect that they aren't as good at. So I think I've talked enough. Elizabeth, so we have the environmental scientists. I assume that you aren't going to cause a mass exodus from people at the ground level in the EPA into your IT department, but what would you suggest if they wanted to create that stampede?
Again, I'll echo what Grant said, and I'll also point out that I have a background in theoretical extreme value theory as well. And Grant and I have obviously taken very sort of different paths in our careers, but sort of have similar backgrounds. And so it just points to the next point that I wanted to make sure to make is that they're obviously having certain sets of skills and knowing how to solve certain types of methodological problems and build models and write code, et cetera, very important. But what I think is even more important is the ability and the willingness to learn, because that's how you get to the next thing. And so, when you are getting a PhD, you are sort of learning how to learn in a way. So and on a really big problem, right? So then you take that set of skills. So I don't use the formulas that I wrote down in my PhD dissertation on a day-to-day basis. I've never looked at that thing again. But the idea is that you learn how to solve the problems, you learn how to learn. So my sort of piece of advice is figure out what you enjoy learning about and then continue to go look for those opportunities to learn. So take the side project that is of interest. That's what I did in my postdoc. I took a side project that was working on air quality at EPA. And then that led me to a connection that forwarded me a job announcement, and I ended up with a position at EPA. And then I would also say, again, take on those side projects that are of interest, including outside work, maybe outside your direct group, maybe outside your organization with a professional organization. Because again, I have zero background in how to build a database and how to construct, a cloud-hosted analytics system. And yet that's the division that I'm currently managing, right? Because I have other skills and, again, a lot of those sort of like power skills types of things. And I appreciate the staff's expertise. I wholly rely on their technical background, and I'm able to have those conversations with them because I'm willing to learn about what it is that they do, and I'm willing to understand their expertise. And that points to the collaborative nature of statistics as a discipline, right? So one of the things you learn as a statistician is how to collaborate with other experts. And so you can take that set of skills and apply it in sort of a different situation. So again, I think it just points to it's not that there's a set of boxes that you can check off and you take XYZ classes. Certainly in a standard degree program, absolutely, that's what you need to do. But when you think about your career holistically, there's not someone out there looking for you to check those specific boxes. They're looking for you to have a certain level of intelligence and a little bit of experience, working on projects, working with other people, and a willingness to learn, and enthusiasm for what you're going to take on. And then again, I look for, collaborative nature and insights. Are you excited to be there? And are you going to be offering a new perspective to the project, to the group, et cetera? So there's just a whole realm of ways to develop your skills, develop your interests, that kind of goes outside that traditional checklist of courses. So it's definitely important to take some of those courses that interest you, but I just wouldn't want someone to think they only need to do those courses, or if they do those courses, if that's the only path to get to where they want to go. So it's just such a collaborative and interesting investigative discipline that I think there's a lot of different types of opportunities. So be on the lookout for those and pursue the ones that are exciting for you as an individual, because that's what you'll put your effort into, and that's how you'll shine, and that's how you'll be the best overall for your organization, is if you're working on projects that excite you. And good managers should also know that, so they should help you look for those opportunities. And sometimes that means that you leave their immediate group, but hopefully you go somewhere else in the organization and strengthen it from a different place. So yeah, all of these ideas, I think, kind of all tie together. So definitely interested in what Megan would think as well.
Yep, Megan, go ahead. Yeah, I like that idea that, and don't worry, I'm not going to give added commentary after everyone's bit, but I do like the idea that the idea of there being necessary and sufficient conditions for someone to be competent at their job. It's bad for a prospective employee to have, because you'll put yourself into a box. It's bad for a hiring manager to have, because you're essentially going to be turning down talent. And there's a whole bunch of no one's swimming in talent, like where it's just competent scientists who have coding skills are just banging on your door saying, "Please hire me." Like, I don't know, Grant, maybe you have that, but this is a rarer skill set, and it's something where you need to find talent where you can. So, Megan.
Okay, and I just first want to say I agree with everything that Grant and Elizabeth said, and I'm going to try really hard to get more specific in my answer, just to kind of avoid repeating what they said. So I think from my experience in a lot of statistics programs and data science programs, there is a lot of emphasis in formal education, even if it's just a certificate or whatever, on the analysis and modeling parts of the process. And so if you're going to, and that is something that generally spans fields, pretty easily. Maybe there's different names, but you've got kind of that foundation in there. So in my opinion, in switching disciplines, switching fields, some of the stuff that's going to change is the very beginning of the process. Like, what are the challenges for data collection? What type of data are collected? And just having, you can put some homework into that interview, or even just finding out whether like an environmental science area is going to be interesting. Like, how do they collect data? What are the challenges? What can we, are there places to work in that aspect? What are sampling or experimental design problems? And then also going to the very other end of the process, which is what type of inferences do they want to make? What are the problems? What are the big, I forget who said like the problem scope. I think that was Grant, like just kind of really understanding kind of big picture what we're after. So I guess maybe that's kind of less, or maybe that isn't an automatic place that people go in wanting to kind of prepare for a career shift within data science. We tend to kind of focus on the analysis and modeling, but I encourage people to explore kind of the front end and the far end of the process.
Yeah, so I'll ping off of what Megan just said, that there's sort of a lot of different ways that it's termed, but under the umbrella of data science, you have maybe like the data analyst and the data engineer, and I'm sure there's a couple of other categories there, but I think that's a very quickly growing and extremely important niche of data science, in that sort of data engineer is that that the statistician that takes the nice pretty data and puts it in their model is pretty far removed from the data collection point, right? So there's a whole bunch of things that have to happen between the collection and then the actual use of the data. And there's the pipeline side of it, but then there's also the data munging, how do you mush this together? How do I pull in other data sources? How do I make sure these are linked correctly? Metadata is extremely important. And when you talk about systems of data, you have to start thinking about data governance. So when you pull in data from different sources, how are you considering how those will sit together and be searchable and discoverable, and then able to actually be used in the problem. So it just, like Megan said, there's all different points in what would be considered a statistics problem in which someone can come at it from a data science perspective. So just like there's a lot of different paths in environmental statistics or data science that go beyond climate change, there's so many things that go beyond, creating a graph, which is also fun and important. And it's, of course, a crucial point to be able to communicate with information. But there's so many things that go on before you even get to that, literally that data point. So a lot of different types of things to think about that suit a variety of different skill sets and interests along the way.
Yeah, and I think just showing that you have the broader context of a problem that you can do those little details, whatever detail that is along that whole process, while still keeping the broader context of the problem and the goal in mind. So, I mean, that's a hard thing to get through in a interview, but I think looking at some of these, what are the big conclusions and inferences at the end, and how can we actually collect data, and what are the problems with that, kind of forces you to kind of wrap that bigger context around maybe the little part that you're going to be doing, which there are so many of those parts, as Elizabeth said.
One thing I'm curious about, maybe to hear from you, Megan and Elizabeth, in environmental sciences world, this idea of kind of working in different domains and understanding different parts of a whole process or pipeline. I mean, in my world, that even in some cases can extend out further to more traditional science or business domains, like understanding, learning more about, the biological mechanisms of insulin response, for treating diabetes, and or learning more about how a CFO thinks about a business. And one thing I'm curious from your perspectives is going broad and learning about different areas in your space. Is that something that is beneficial or even maybe necessary for career growth in your space? Or can someone be really heavily focused on the analytics or the main data science methodologic pieces of things and still advance in their career?
Well, I'll say from my opinion, maybe they can still advance in the career. I don't think that broad view and being open to putting time into learning those parts from other disciplines that seem maybe a little bit disconnected, but still then you're going to do a better job at your job because you're going to have the broader context. You're not going to make a mistake with your modeling or analytical tool because you just kind of didn't listen to the subject matter expertise about what the underlying problems were. So I think that's a huge part personally. I know plenty of people who, if you stay focused enough, you can still have a fully successful, happy career. But I don't know, I like the broad. In fact, that's a great question.
Yeah, I would say that both, and it would just depend on what's of interest to you. So if you, myself, I have, as my career has rambled along, decided that I really like the broader perspective. I really like seeing how, in my case, the agency works as a whole, and kind of tackling these broad problems across data management and how we think about all of this as an enterprise across the entire agency. However, there is a huge need for there to be very specialized technical experts in certain areas. And I'm going to say the agency, because that's where I am, but also in other careers as well. So I think what I was speaking to before is if someone is starting out, there's a lot of different paths that you can take, kind of poke around, find out what interests you. And then, maybe that takes you down a path where you do end up in one of those very specialized roles. And if that's what you enjoy doing, that's fantastic. That's what you should do. You've found your path. Whereas I'm the type of person, and this is what happens when I go on a hike, right? I say to my poor husband, okay, we're going to hike for 2 hours, and then we're out there for 2 hours. Like, no, there's another little side trail. Where's that one going to go? We got to go see what's around the next corner. I want to know what the next thing is, right? So that's my personality. So I always want to be learning more and taking on the next challenge. I'm interested in so many things. I'm one of those people that wants to take on every project that's put in front of me because they're all so interesting. And I will say that's another skill that people should learn is how you say no to 27 projects at one time. But that's and being on the management side, I'm able to touch on a lot of different projects. But every once in a while, there's a really cool project. Just today, we had a meeting about one where I thought, man, it'd be really cool if I could just work on that environmental justice project for like the next year and just really dive into it. That's not my current role. But that someone else gets to go off and do that very specialized role. So I think the answer is both, that there's room. And then you just find, what works for you. And again, find projects that are of interest, and kind of keep poking at, maybe do some side things, because that's how you'll find what will keep you interested and engaged. And there's, I think, a lot of options in most places. There's a lot of options for people.
Yeah, I really appreciate that question from Grant. Just to clarify, I guess maybe where you're coming from a bit, it seems that in, for example, clinical domains and healthcare domains, where one of the reasons that we want people to have a broad enough view of things is because effectively we're all interrelated. And if operationally we can't effectively just have our own little silo and not work on anything. Obviously, if you're a cardiothoracic surgeon, then focusing on the surgery is the thing that you need to do. On the other hand, if you are working in machine learning for patient monitoring, it's not sufficient that you just know the patient's physiology. You need to know how clinical staff are going to be reacting to whatever signals that you have, or you need to know that there's some operational aspects that would inform the data that is coming in. And so effectively, your efficacy as a statistician or data scientist can rapidly break down when you don't appreciate those extra contexts. And I guess what I was sort of the interesting bit was, can you have that type of like large grade failure in environmental things? And Grant, maybe if I'm wrong in that summary, just let me know.
No, that is kind of the direction I was going, and I was also kind of wanting to explore a little bit. Maybe this is just kind of my own experience or interactions with people, but there can be in industry in particular. There can be this mentality that the only way I advance is to manage more and more people, and to have like more people report to me and have like a bigger span of work that I'm overseeing. And in a lot of places, I think this varies by organization. In a lot of places, I think that's true, and I certainly do agree with the discussion here that needing to know enough about a problem domain or collaborators space to be able to communicate effectively and to collaborate effectively with them is important. But I was also kind of asking, and Elizabeth mentioned too, like that doesn't mean that there's not room for somebody who really wants to contribute their particular expertise to a broader problem, without necessarily having to know everything about everything. And actually still be rewarded for that, because there is real technical expertise that, to something you said earlier, Glenn, is rare in a lot of industries and a lot of companies. And so I think that's just something to kind of be thinking about as people look for careers. Is can somebody be very, very successful as an individual contributor or just on a small team? Or does career advancement look like managing more and more people and more projects? Because I think it can be different depending on the company and depending on the industry.
Yeah, cool. So I guess the next question that someone provided was around data science boot camps and the idea of obviously there isn't only just data science boot camps. There's self-taught data scientists. There are people learning to code on their own. There are people who are learning the domain aspects on their own, which we just advise that people try to do. And I guess boot camps are one of those issues. There's, micro courses. There's a large variety of these types of things. But for people who are looking to use these types of learning avenues to get an entry level position, are is there hope? Is that a good way for someone who basically needs to get a job at the end? And maybe Grant, I know it's a fact that you are hiring right now, so I guess maybe that's a useful place to start. Would this be like a boot camp? Would that be sufficient, or what do they need to supplement on top of that in order to get even an internship or just get their foot in the door? Because I think a lot of people are just looking for a way to prove themselves. If you have the energy, you can prove yourself. And so, what would they need?
Yeah, this is a really hard one for me because I bring a healthy dose of skepticism for the idea that you can learn data science in like a 6-week boot camp of an online course. It's hard for me to fathom that somebody could do a couple courses like that and be expected to come in and perform at the level of, say, someone who did a master's degree at a university and in data science. That said, though, I think there are I do think it does demonstrate that someone has a real interest in the space, and if there's tangible output that someone can demonstrate from that to show, hey, I took this course, and through that activity, I built this algorithm and applied it to this data, and here's what I learned, and here's the limitations of it, and here's why I thought it was exciting. And if, as I talk to someone, if they can demonstrate that there's, not just I followed some recipe that I learned in the course, but that I'm actually trying to solve some problem, and I have more of a conceptual understanding of why I'm applying this algorithm and what the output is actually telling me. Then that's when, for me as a hiring manager, my light goes on and say, okay, this is someone who is actually thinking about this and understands what they might not know, and kind of demonstrates that. But that said, I do see a lot of resumes of people who, they learn a couple techniques and did some standardized things in Python, and then now market themselves as a data scientist. And that as a recruiter, as someone hiring, it can be hard to sift through the many resumes that come through with that kind of background.
Yeah, just to quickly add on to that, maybe this is just a helpful getting hiring tip, if you will. But one of the things that I think really stands out is when people, they just don't tell you their success story, but they actually tell you when something went wrong and why it went wrong and what they learned because it went wrong. And that, I think, is a massive difference between those two things, because anyone can get something right because there's recipes to get things right. But when things go wrong, one, it means obviously you've already gone off the trail a bit. And also the critical thinking that is required in order to diagnose your problem, because you have to figure out, is this a domain-based problem versus an actual technical problem? Is it because my model inference didn't go right, or is it because this data isn't actually appropriate for this model? Things like that. And giving those little kernels of wisdom, I think it's really like an attractive intellectual trait that you can bring to it. That's just a quick hint if people are looking for maybe one way to stand out. I've always seen that when some of the people who ultimately hired me, when that light goes on, it's because effectively it's not for me saying, oh, look, I did Bayesian optimization to tune these personalized time series models. It's like, hey, this optimization thing totally blew up this one time. Let me tell you about that, because fiddling with that and making that work is actually the main thing that adds value. Very quickly, just to deal with this. Does Megan and Elizabeth, do you generally agree with Grant on this idea that the sort of these boot camps and these short courses might not be getting people the credentials that they need? So that's one question. And then I guess the second question is like, what can people do to get their foot in the door? What can they do to get these entry-level positions? Because sometimes it feels as if there isn't actually an entry step. It's like you need to have a master's degree or a PhD, and there's no real entry step because the entry step requires a lot of work to train that person to the next level.
Well, I would say generally I agree with Grant. And then I would also say getting the training to be a data scientist can be a lot of work. It's a complex field. And if you're going to undertake complex problems, then you kind of have to put in some work on the front end to have an understanding of how to deal with those problems. I don't necessarily think it is a bad thing to take those boot camps, but I don't think they are standalone, as Grant was alluding to. So I don't necessarily think that someone can get all of the skills that they need within 6 weeks. However, I do think it could be a good place for someone to learn whether or not they have an aptitude for that type of thing. And also, if they enjoyed it, then they will automatically be looking for the next thing. So hopefully it leads to something in that realm that is of interest to them. And then they take the next set in the series. And then, as Grant mentioned, what is also really key for a hiring manager is to have something tangible that that you can look at that they've done as a product. Even if it's a student coming out of a program, they did a consulting project. I can see that they tackled a real world problem, they dealt with a customer, they worked with actual data, and they produced a report, right? That's generally a work week around here, so you want to see that that they're able to they've started building those skills. And if that's something that they enjoy doing, at least pieces of that, then they have things to build on. So I definitely agree with Grant that it's not that a 6-week course will give you all of the skills that you need. But I would also encourage people that might be interested in transitioning into possibly looking at something like that to see if that is of interest to them and where it might lead them next. So I don't want to dissuade people from taking those because I think they can add some value. But they're definitely not the only thing that someone is looking for.
Yeah, I completely agree with Elizabeth and Grant on that. So yeah, it would have to be, if you're adding this data science boot camp, it's what are you adding it to? What previous experiences are you adding it to? And do you realize, have you done enough reading, enough, I don't know, even listening to podcasts or reading papers, meetings, that you have some recognition that there's a lot more that you don't know. So I think, Grant said this, you have to know enough to know what you don't know. And that's really tricky as if you're not there, you don't know that you're not there, right? But it's really important going into it. So even little language phrases, like if somebody comes in and tells me, oh, I'm a statistician, and I look at their CV, I'm like, well, it doesn't look like you have I have my certificate in statistics, so I'm a statistician, or I did my 6-week boot camp, so I'm a data scientist. Even just using different language, here's all the experience I have. I took this data science boot camp. I have this certificate, is a little different. It's a different attitude towards the kind of overall problem and to a potential employer than kind of coming in with a limited back, supposing that you've made it into that category already. I don't know if it's like a never ending thing. Yeah. There is no end you get to a data scientist or statistician, but just an honest acknowledgement that of really how much formal and or on the job experience you have.
It helps set expectations.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh yes, and it just helps set expectations. Where if someone comes in and says here, just to make a crazy example, if I come in and say, yes, I'm Elizabeth Mannshardt, you can trust me to do your environmental statistics, and then they look at me and my CV, or just me, and it was like, no, you aren't. It's like there's that disappointment, and it's like you might be good for other things, but this isn't your deal yet. And so it just developing a product or something like that, you set expectations. And when you misrepresent something like that, especially a group like this, who we have very, rigorous expectations of what it means to be a statistician, because we've thought about it quite a bit, and even asking ourselves, are we statisticians, things like that. You're setting yourself up to disappoint the person already, and you don't need to do that. But I cut you off midpoint. So what was your other point?
Oh, no. And I was just going to say, and along with that, then comes this kind of balancing of confidence versus overconfidence, right? So what I do not want to have happen is me hire somebody who's overconfident in their skills and doesn't come and ask questions or is honest about what they don't know once they realize they're running into it. So I think in the interview process, in the thing that you can by being confident but honest about the fact that there's going to be a lot that you're going to have to learn on the job, and that's the part you're excited about. And this gets back to what Elizabeth was saying, like that you are willing and excited and able to learn, and that you will communicate well and often with with your team or your supervisor to get there.
Yeah, I like that. I think maybe one good way to do it is basically, instead of saying like I am X or I am Y, saying like I'm this position, I serve this role. It's just, you just tell them like, what are the technical issues that have beaten you up on a daily basis, and what are the actual domain challenges that leave you awake at night because you haven't resolved them, and some of them might even be irresolvable. And so things like that, where you're just like, you don't need to say I'm a data scientist. You say like, you know, computer generated data sources with zero error but high volatility and severe step changes basically ruin my day, and that's what I spend all my day doing. And when you do things like that, it's like, oh yeah, okay, they're dealing with actual challenges and they think about it. Cool. Yeah, Grant or Elizabeth, did you want to add to that? Either Megan's point or my random tangent off of that point.
No, I just liked Megan's point about there's never an end to becoming a data scientist. So there's always something new around the corner, always something, another part of the domain that you can learn more about. So, and lots of different paths within that.
Yeah, I would agree. And any the passion to continue learning and develop new skills and learn about new areas will also have a nice side effect of giving you many future opportunities in your career. So keep moving forward is how I always think about it.
And of course, the best way to move forward is to watch a data and science podcast. And obviously, smashing like buttons and leaving comments, that's the best way. If you really want to amp up your CV, what you should do is take a screenshot of every thumbs up and comment you've left on your favorite data science podcast. I think that bit hasn't been covered enough, but I just wanted to get it in there. But yeah, maybe for our last question, because I know we're running out of time. You guys are you need to get going. But one thing that was always interested in me is like, the issue that there are certain domain level phenomena that sort of help separate whether or not someone has substantially dealt with an issue or not. A simple example would be, of course, the one that we talked about before, was, in certain clinical domains, you have to understand that you're sitting within a system and that there are actual clinical staff who will be using your work. And there's some, physiological phenomena that actually create the data that you deal with. On an environmental level, because I know we've said, there's climate studies, there's ecology. There are many of these different areas, but are there different basic phenomena that people should figure out? Like, I'm going to mess this up. Like how do plants affect some ecological system versus what do animals do? Or, how do weather patterns or climate interact with geographical features and things like that? Are there some basic things where, like, if someone said, I want to study the ecology of the Everglades, that you'd say, like, look at gators, look at pythons, and look at the Gulf of Mexico? Like, are there some basic real world phenomena that people should fixate on, depending on which environmental domain they're interested in?
That's a hard one. I'm not sure how specific to go there. So, I mean, I guess I come back to data collection and sampling. So I don't know that I go specific to a species, but I guess that's where I start for the problem. Like, where are we even starting to gather information? Like, the whole rest of the process is going to be based on information that comes out of this data collection, well, maybe like theory put in. So, so that depends on the process. So if you are going to study alligators and then you have to figure out, like, how do we possibly get information on alligators? If it's radio tagging and then it's satellite telemetry data that you've got to figure out, like, that'll send you down a whole path to look at. So, and then the modeling comes out of that. So, so I guess maybe that's more general than you were asking, but you really have to narrow in first on how to actually get that information that's going to be modeled.
That's actually an awesome answer. I know that you were a bit circumspect on that, but I'll double down that was an awesome answer because when you talk about, for example, sampling and experimental design, generally what I call that is, the data generative process. What is the process generating your data? The moment you've defined that, your different ways forward define themselves. So Elizabeth or Grant?
I can go back. I'll go back to my dissertation days to stay with the environmental sciences area. And one of the things that I didn't spend nearly as enough time that I should have probably been thinking about or focused on because I was doing a PhD was thinking about it's the same idea that the source of the data. In my case, it was looking at output of climate simulation models, and those things are. There was I worked at the National Center for Atmospheric Research and collaborators there in Boulder, Colorado, and it was, I remember conversations kind of at lunch where it was like people were meteorologists and atmospheric scientists were like, talking about who could build the most complex or most lines of code into their simulation model and have parameterize every single like micro detail of processes. And I later on I thought about it and it just kind of came back and said, there's all sorts of sources of uncertainty and things that we just don't know that are embedded into this data before I even get to it and look at it. And so it was really, and there's been, subsequently a lot of work done in the field of uncertainty quantification and understanding how some of these large computer models work. But really just kind of going back and thinking about, as you think of a data pipeline and a data science pipeline, like where are all the sources of variability or uncertainty or just we don't know what exactly is going on here in that process. And that's okay. Like that doesn't mean you can't do anything, but knowing that also helps you to think through like what problems can I really solve and not solve, knowing how this process actually works.
Keep in mind, not only were you wanting to explain these processes in there your data, but it was simulations creating it, which means it was computer, it was a codified, everything like that. We need to go back and tell graduate level Grant, no good. So you've confessed your shame now on this?
Yes, but I won't take back my PhD.
We would never ask that. Yeah, but no, I think that's great, and it does show again that people who do rise to the top of their field, they are constantly critically assessing their own work, figuring out where they went wrong, and identifying what they could do better in the future. So I think that is the main point there. That even though Grant is obviously well past this project, that still faults and mistakes he takes with him so that he can basically not make those mistakes in the future. And he obviously has been quite successful in his career. Elizabeth, you're up next, and I'll minimize the teasing for what it's worth. Maybe not.
Well, I'll say Grant is brilliant, and all of that, it's all part of the learning process and all part of how you learn to solve a problem and the types of things you think about when you sort of bridge theoretical statistics with real world applications. So there's just a whole gamut in there, and uncertainty quantification is a hugely important field. But people do get tunneled down into their own their own complex modeling systems, which isn't right or wrong, but then it's always good to take a step back. So speaking to the data generation process, I think, so as Megan was talking about, how you go out and find, learn about where the information came from. Two things that have really stood out to me in some of the projects that I've worked on as an environmental statistician, I think kind of runs the gamut of where does data come from. And when I was a postdoc at SAMC, the Statistical and Applied Mathematical Sciences Institute, I was in a paleoclimate research group. And so paleoclimate data is like, what was happening in olden times? What was temperature, climate, rainfall, tens of thousands, if not millions of years ago. And worked with Martin Tingley in that, also another brilliant statistician, climate person, but one of the things that stood out to me that he said is that when you look at one paleoclimate data series, so you look at one, tree ring temperature series, he said that's a PhD student's entire dissertation, right, in that field, right? So we think of it as we get the data points as statisticians, but there's this whole process by which the data is generated, and it's different across different fields and different applications. So that really stood out to me. And then a little while later, on a different postdoc project, I was working with satellite products. And then I had to, every once in a while, it would just hit me that they send this machine, hundreds of thousands of miles into the universe, and then it points a ray back down at the Earth, and it gives me a measurement of the sea surface salinity that's accurate to 0.3 of a microgram in concentration. Like, it's astounding, right? The different ways that we are able to generate data. There's a lot of considerations that come into play across all those different types of data sources. As Grant was talking about, we think about uncertainty quantification, we think about measurement uncertainty, all of those things. But just when we really think about what it takes to actually collect data and to get that to the statistician, I think it can really help statisticians and data scientists really do a better job in their own analysis and their own careers, having that understanding and that respect about where the data actually came from. And then it also is great if you have an opportunity to go out for an afternoon with the people that are collecting that data. So I was able to go out when I was at NCAR that Grant mentioned, National Center for Atmospheric Research, and looked at coring a tree, which doesn't hurt the tree at all, just FYI, but you take a little sample from the tree and, really seeing how that one piece of data was gathered that would then be put in a tree ring reconstruction series. So I think every once in a while, taking a step back and thinking about, what it takes to get a data point to the statistician or data scientist, I think can be a really important perspective to have.
Yeah, and just to follow up on that, because one, I would just say anyone who's early in their career, literally just rewind it and re-listen to what Elizabeth said again, because I think those hit on several very good illustrative stories that can help guide you. And more generally than that, none of the advice that I've heard so far is something that wouldn't immediately be applicable and useful to someone, for example, in biomedical engineering, patient monitoring, the support of clinical trials and pharmaceutical trials like that, airplane engine monitoring, other areas, pharmacokinetic simulations, things like that. And I'm just literally naming the areas that I've worked in where those descriptions that we just had could all be useful. And so I think that this goes to show and underlines the point that Grant, Elizabeth, and Megan have all been making, that there's a wide range. There's no necessary or sufficient criteria, but there are some good practices that can really help you advance your capability. So I really appreciate you guys coming on today and giving that insight. Did you have any final thoughts or comments? I know Grant, I know you're hiring. So if you want to work with a really smart guy with great insight who gives really good advice on awesome podcasts, there might be an opportunity. But maybe Grant, if you start, and then we'll go back clockwise for final comments.
Yeah, thanks, Glenn. I appreciate the plug. Yeah, we are hiring data scientists and particularly data scientists kind of with an engineering mindset to work in all sorts of different applications within healthcare, a lot of patient monitoring types of things, new technologies. So yeah, if that area interests you, feel free to reach out. But other than that, I would just say, there's many opportunities out there in many industries for data science and people with technical skills, and also not just the technical skills, but the way of thinking about problems that is trained into data scientists. And so I would encourage people to explore and to find areas that work for them. And I'll maybe close with my one of my advisors when I was at Carnegie Mellon, Bill Eddy, who was a emeritus faculty, said, if you don't like what you're doing, do something different. And as data scientists, there's lots of other things out there to explore. So I would encourage people to do that.
Yeah, I will speak to those who may be interested in careers in government. So if you are, I highly encourage you to go to usajobs.gov. Any and all government jobs are posted to that site, and you can only apply to that site. So if you send me your resume, I can't do anything with it. So usajobs.gov, and you can set up a profile, and you can have it, you can set parameters. So you're interested in a job description that has the word statistics in it. You're interested in a job that's located in the DC area. You can set those things, and it will send you job notifications. So a couple of points on that. One, just as of last July, I believe, the government opened up a job series title of data scientist, and it's kind of meant to be a little bit of an umbrella that and be able to bring in different types of disciplines. Statistician, engineer could fall under those umbrellas. So there's also a couple of places where you can find broad data science application avenues where you post your resume and information, and then anyone who's looking for a data scientist can go to that job announcement and sort of parse through the resumes. That doesn't happen often, so there may or may not be one of those open now, but if you see that, that's a great place to broadly apply. Usually when you're on usajobs.gov, you're applying to one particular position. And then the other thing I will say is that government jobs tend to be posted for very short periods of time. It's usually 5 business days. So you want to be have an account set up, have your flag set so that it can let you know when a job announcement goes through. And once the job announcement closes, they're not legally allowed to reopen it. So it's a very short window, but USA Jobs is a really great resource and is the only way that you can actually apply for a government job. So those interested in careers in government, definitely check that out. It also will have information about the Federal Pathways Program, which is sort of like internships programs as well as like apprenticeship programs. It's kind of like segue careers in government, often offered for 1 to 2 years, but then can segue possibly into permanent positions. And then intern positions can also be posted on USA Jobs, postdocs as well. I will say sometimes non-permanent positions may be posted in other parts of agencies as well. So definitely, again, comb through web pages of places that you're interested in working.
Cool. So very quickly, checking the site once is not good. You should create up a flag system so that you catch things as they come in.
Absolutely.
Cool. All right. And Megan.
Hey, yeah, I think similar to Grant's kind of closing words, I think that the passion and curiosity can take you so far, and I think can be scary to consider in our career paths. But I think it's pretty rare to run into somebody who regrets taking one of those, even if they don't stay in it that long. It still is another experience. As far as specific advice, kind of like Elizabeth was giving, feel free to just contact companies or nonprofits about internship opportunities. So they don't always post those opportunities publicly, but so there's a lot more out there just by, I at least in my experience, just reaching out and just asking if there are opportunities available. So if you find a company or nonprofit, whatever, that would be, it would work. Actually doing volunteer work for nonprofits is also a great way to get some experience too, and some things to put on your resume. I have not done it personally, which I should. It's on my list to do, but anyway, that would be a great kind of a great thing to do. So yeah, I think back to passion and curiosity, and finding something you love.
Yeah, I can just double down that nonprofits are always happy to have people help them out and have volunteers. And if that volunteerism takes an intellectual role like data analysis, they're all the happier for it. So they're always looking for extra hands. So I think that is definitely a good way. Well, each of you, thanks so much for your time and your expertise. I appreciate it. And also thank you for supporting early career data scientists and landing that job and becoming better and etc. So thanks again.
Thank you.
Thanks, Glenn. Thanks for putting this together.
Hey guys, it's Glenn. Thanks for your time today. I hope you liked today's episode. If you did, please consider smashing that like button. It's the single, simplest, fastest way to make sure that YouTube shows this video to more people. If you really want to go crazy, consider subscribing or going to our website and joining the mail list. If you want to go totally crazy beyond that, forward this to a friend or colleague who you think might enjoy this too. We're a small channel and every bit helps. Our next episode will be coming out next week, so in the meantime, feel free to look around the channel and see other videos that might be of interest. As a quick disclaimer, the views expressed on the show do not represent anything other than the people saying those words, views, etc. like that. It doesn't mean anything about their employers or their employers' views or some thing about their employers or their neighbor's cat or anyone else not saying the words. And in fact, given that people tend to change their views when they're thoughtful enough, it might not even represent the views of the speaker by the time you're hearing the episode. So definitely come back and see if they've changed their views at a later date. They also don't represent the views of our sponsors. Thank you to our sponsors. You can check them out on our website.